Looks like everyone's here. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for covering this today. I believe that Wisconsin needs appropriate laws to keep guns out of the hands of people who simply should not have them in the first place. And I've talked about gun transactions as well as gun thefts, avenues in which people obtain guns. Those who should not have guns are using them in Milwaukee to shoot people, to hurt folks in neighborhoods across the city. And of course, I want that to stop as mayor. Everybody behind me wants that to stop as well. People with demonstrated, with violent histories, people who in court have been convicted, must not have easy access to firearms. They just simply should not have easy access to firearms in Milwaukee or in any community across the state of Wisconsin. So that brings us to today's subject, and that's keeping guns out of the hands of folks who are domestic abusers. Attorney General Josh Call, who you'll hear from in just a moment, as well as State Representative Lisa Subek, have been leaders in the work to change Wisconsin law to protect domestic violence victims. Alderwoman Marina Dmitrievich, who you hear from as well, and her colleagues on the Milwaukee Common Council have joined the effort as well. And while mentioning members of the Common Council, again, Alderwoman Dmitrievich is here. We're also joined by 1st District Alderwoman Andrea Pratt. We're joined by 5th District Alderman Lamont Westmoreland. We're joined as well by Alderwoman Jocasta Zamaripa from the 8th District and Alderman Mark Chambers from the 2nd District as well. So thank you, Alders, for being here. Am I missing anybody? Oh, and she's right behind me. We're joined by Alderwoman Larissa Teller from the 9th District as well. Thank you all for joining us today as well. So the resolution that I'm going to sign today directs the city's representatives in Madison to work with elected leaders to change state law. So I'm asking that the folks who are domestic abusers don't get access to guns, that they're barred from possessing firearms, not just in the city of Milwaukee, but in the state of Wisconsin. Now, you may be asking, doesn't federal law already prevent domestic abusers from having a gun? And the answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes, federally. But in Wisconsin, that does not conform to federal laws. Our state laws do not conform to federal laws in Wisconsin. So federal law says guns and ammunition cannot be possessed by someone convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. But Wisconsin does not have such a crime. That needs to change, and with this resolution, the city of Milwaukee is formally joining the effort to solve this problem. This is not just an exercise in legislation. It's not just an exercise in civics. We must never lose sight of the human toll of domestic violence. No matter in what community we live in the state of Wisconsin, we must not lose sight of that. We must offer protection and support for those who are vulnerable, and we must remember the lives of those who have been lost, ended violently because of domestic violence in our community. And we must do what we can to stop gun violence, particularly in high-risk situations. So in a moment, I'm going to ask the Attorney General to join us at the mic. I'm going to ask Representative Subek to do the same, along with Alderwoman Dmitrievich and Carmen Petrie from the Sojourner Family Peace Center. But first, I'll add my signature to the file. Okay. All right, thank you. And then at this time, I'm going to ask Attorney General Josh Call to join us at the podium. Attorney General?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the members of the council. And thank you to everybody who is joining us here today to address this important topic. First, I want to say that it has been a privilege to work with the mayor on public safety issues. He has been a steadfast partner as we have worked to make both the city of Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin safer for all of our residents. About 2 years ago, actually, he joined me as we announced my Safer Wisconsin plan, a comprehensive plan that proposed a number of changes to law that would help make our communities safer. There have been some important investments in public safety that have been made since we rolled that out, but there are a lot of critical investments that we still need to make. One of the things we talked about in rolling out Safer Wisconsin was the need for some common sense gun safety legislation with a basic principle at its core, which is that when people have been proven to be dangerous, we should be able to take action to keep firearms out of their hands, to keep our communities safe. Unfortunately, since we announced that plan about 2 years ago, the law in Wisconsin has changed for the worse, and that is what we are here to talk about today. In 2022, a state Supreme Court decision called actually Dubeck versus Call was a case in which the state Supreme Court ruled that because of the way Wisconsin's domestic violence statute, disorderly conduct statute is constructed, that people convicted under that statute don't qualify under the federal prohibition for misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence, even if the crime itself involved domestic violence. They were applying precedent in that decision. But what that has meant is that people who have not only committed domestic violence, but then been convicted of a crime, specifically the crime of disorderly conduct, because of that crime, are now able lawfully to possess firearms in the state of Wisconsin. Now, at the Department of Justice, we are committed to working to prevent domestic violence. We do that through the investigation and prosecution of serious cases. Tragically, sometimes cases that begin as domestic violence cases end up in homicide or other very serious harm to victims. We also do that through our Safe at Home program that provides address confidentiality to victims of crime, including domestic violence. And we work to provide support to critical victim service programs like some of those that are represented here. Through that work, we work to make Wisconsin safer. And one thing we know, and that the data shows, is that when you combine domestic violence with access to a firearm by the abuser, it makes the situation much, much more dangerous. And there is a disturbingly high rate of domestic violence homicide both in the country and here in Wisconsin. And the overwhelming majority of those homicides are committed with a firearm. So the bill that we have announced would make a simple change to Wisconsin law. It would make clear when a disorderly conduct conviction results from domestic violence, and it would also make clear what the relationship was between the perpetrator and the victim. By doing that, it will be clear from statute when somebody is convicted when disorderly conduct resulted from domestic violence, and the people who commit that crime will be prohibited from owning a gun pursuant to federal law. This is something the public overwhelmingly supports. This is something we need to do to make our communities safer. And it's a privilege to be here with so many people who are advocating for this common sense change to make for a safer Wisconsin. So with that, I have the privilege of introducing Alderwoman Dimitrievich.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to Mayor Johnson, the State Representative, the Attorney General, and my colleagues on the Common Council. What we did on the Common Council just a week ago was not just unanimously adopt this legislation, we unanimously co-sponsored it. That doesn't happen all the time, and it goes to show the really strong support we have for protecting people, victims, and lives in the city of Milwaukee. Simply put, even though this is a complex, traumatic situation that many people have to endure in the city and the state and the United States, this will save lives. We believe that this type of legislation, and which is why we wanted to put our stamp of approval on it and support, will save people's lives in the city of Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin. And that's at the core of the work that we do, is trying to create the most peaceful city for all, where one does not have to worry about their home situation, a trauma that they've been through, and that you can know that we're doing everything we can with all resources to be comprehensive, to help you be in a safe environment. So that's the message that we want to send. I think you're going to see more of this coming out of the Common Council and Mayor's office, is when there's good and great legislation coming out of Madison, we are going to scream loudly and together and from City Hall right here that we support it. We have a great governor and many friends in the legislature that are thinking about the citizens in the city of Milwaukee, and when you do that in the state of Wisconsin, we want to join hands and arms with you, especially when it comes to matters of public safety. And that's what we're doing today, and we're really happy to do it. So I was happy to author it, and even more content to have it unanimously sponsored by all of my colleagues on the Common Council. So we do believe that this will create peace, it will save lives, and really I hope for anybody listening, especially anybody going through a situation where you may be wondering what are things going to be like when you come home, that you might be living in fear. There is help. You can find support, and this is one huge step to hopefully bring peace to lives that have felt some challenges. So we're happy to do it in the city of Milwaukee, and again, I think we're going to be doing more of this when we see positive bills like this come out of Madison. Thank you. And with that, I'll introduce, thank you, State Representative Lisa Subik, the author in the State Assembly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to Alderwoman Dimitrovich and to the mayor and to the full city council for joining us in this effort and getting behind this bill. I have been surprised by the number of phone calls and emails that we have gotten from folks after writing about this in our newsletter in my office who said, "You mean that domestic abusers have access to guns?" People don't even know that this is an issue. And I have to say that people are shocked when they hear that it is. The response is overwhelmingly that people are surprised to learn that somebody who has been convicted of domestic abuse, whether a misdemeanor, a felony, or otherwise, has access to guns. They're surprised to learn that we have a loophole in our state law that means that individuals who are convicted of misdemeanor disorderly conduct in a domestic violence incident still have access to that weapon. But it goes beyond people being surprised by this. This is a bill that is about saving lives. It's about keeping our communities and our families safer. The reality is, for somebody who is being victimized by a domestic abuser, they are 5 times more likely to be killed by their abuser if there's a gun in that household. 5 times more likely. There are preventable deaths happening in the city of Milwaukee, in the city of Madison, where I live, and in this state every week, every month, every year that are fully preventable if we just got those guns out of the hands of individuals who we know are dangerous, who we know are victimizing somebody with whom they're in a relationship, somebody who they live with. And we can prevent those deaths. And that's why we've introduced this bill. And I really appreciate Attorney General Call's leadership on this. He has worked hand in hand with Senator Royce, the bill author in the state Senate, and myself as we have worked to get this done. In the Capitol, we have been talking about keeping guns out of the hands of domestic abusers for years, but nothing is getting done. And it is so critical that folks here in Milwaukee and folks across our state add their voices to this fight, because it is incumbent on each and every one of us to prevent deaths of individuals at the hands of their abusers. We can keep families in our communities safer, and this bill is one small common sense step to doing it. If we close this loophole, it means that lives will be saved. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Carmen Petre. Am I pronouncing that correctly? From Sojourner.
Thank you so much. So I'm just one of the representatives here from other agencies in the city working to prevent gun violence. Dana World Patterson from Foundations for Freedom. WAVE is here. Moms Demand Action. So Sojourner is one organization. It's really important for us. I want to commend our legislators and our leaders for this resolution and for working so diligent on this issue. Guns in the hands of abusers increases lethality. Any way you look at it, a gun in the home or in the hand of someone who's been proven to hurt someone, where a court of law found and convicted them, makes everything dangerous, not only for that survivor, but for all of us. We know that violence spills out into our theaters, our places of worship, our workplaces. So for me, this is a common sense piece of legislation. The other thing I was thinking as I was standing here, you've heard some of the statistics. 80% of the homicides that happened last year were committed with a firearm. That is not new news for those of us who are advocates working in the field. When you have a gun in the hand of someone who wants to hurt you, the situation is much more dangerous. It's not only that there are homicides being committed, survivors often report being terrorized by the abuser with the gun. It isn't only that the homicide's committed. Maybe the gun is taken out and threatened, held up to your head, or the heads, your children are threatened. So this is really important for us to join with survivors in creating the safety they need. It is not new news that we're facing a homicide epidemic. In the fall of 2019, we started to notice homicides go up. COVID has not made anything better. We hit an all-time high in 2020. We had 52 homicides, domestic violence related here in Milwaukee County. I think we had 42 in 21 and 40-something in 22. We do not have to be living in this state of emergency. Domestic violence homicides are predictable and they're preventable. So if we get the guns out of the hands of people we know want to hurt others, that's one step and one way we can say to survivors, you're not alone, it's not your fault, and we're here to help. So thank you to all of you for pushing this through. I hope we can get it over the finish line and conform with our federal legislation. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Dana, did you have comments that you wanted to? No?
I'm happy
Did
to.
you? Okay,
Sure.
please, thank you.
Stand with me. Stand with me. The opportunity to raise awareness about the plight of homicides in our community, this is exceptional. And so we're looking forward to this going over the finish line. And as Carmen said, it matters to every victim that has experienced human trafficking, domestic violence, that's living with the threat of not being able to return home. So yes, we have the issue around holding guns within homes, but also the opportunity for victims to experience freedom is very important. We can't ignore it. We have to deal with it. So I'm looking forward to this being pushed across the line. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Well, there was a term that Carmen used here about this legislation. I think that the Attorney General alluded to it as well. This is common sense. But this is common sense. People who are domestic abusers, people who are known to be violent, they should not have their hands on guns. Because when they have their hands on guns, guess what? They'll elevate those levels of violence and they'll use those guns to hurt people. And not just to hurt people, but to threaten them and sometimes even kill them. We don't want to see that happen in Milwaukee. We don't want to see that happen in Madison. We don't want to see that happen in any community across the entire state of Wisconsin. So it's my hope that by adding our voice to this, it'll give some much needed pressure in the legislature to push this across the finish line so that victims of domestic violence across the entire state of Wisconsin will have more securities and will not be threatened by abusers who happen to have guns. Speaking of common sense approaches, I mentioned this a number of times before as well, and I alluded to it in my remarks earlier. We have another issue in Milwaukee specifically where individuals are stealing guns from cars, right? Folks know that, we know that folks are coming into the city, they're bringing guns, they're not securing those guns. Folks are stealing guns out of those cars, and then they're using those guns to negatively impact, to sometimes to shoot and to kill people in neighborhoods across the city. It makes sense, I believe, for there to be legislation to increase penalties for individuals who are not properly securing their guns. Then also increasing penalties on individuals who are committing the crime of breaking into a vehicle and stealing those guns to use them for violent purposes in neighborhoods across Milwaukee. If we do these things, I think we'll be in a better position to save lives in the city of Milwaukee and indeed across the entire state of Wisconsin. So with that, I think we're happy to answer a couple questions.
For Carmen or for the mayor, can we say that domestic violence-related homicides are up this year, or are you talking about this sort of 4-year surge or mushrooming of all homicides? Can you speak to the mic?
Why don't you come here?
I would say we're on track to land in the 40s. I don't have the exact statistic. Sojourner collects statistics a little different. Any bystander, for instance, killed in a domestic would be counted by Sojourner. Statutorily, the police department and other entities, the Department of Justice, can only count those homicides that meet the definition. So it's people who live together in the past, or have a child in common. So I think we're on track to hit low 40s again, which again, a bad year prior to COVID was 25. That was unheard of. We were hovering in my career around 15. One death is way too many. We need to remember that. But we're far and above where we should be as a city in terms of lethality. And the problem isn't only the homicide, that's the tip of the iceberg. For every homicide, there are hundreds that are just as lethal working their way to a homicide. So,
Question
Mayor?
for Attorney General Call. Do you feel this is something that can be bipartisan? I mean, what have you heard from Democrats about this? Or sorry, Republicans?
So the short answer is I hope it is. You know, the state of the law in Wisconsin prior to that 2022 decision I mentioned is that folks were considered to be prohibited, and that case was one involving the denial of a permit. That's why the named defendant is me. It's because our office denied that permit. That was pursuant to an earlier court decision. So this is something that had been understood to be the law. The legislature wasn't trying to change that. So it's my hope that we can take this simple step of going back to where we all understood the law to be prior to that court decision. Where the proof will be in the pudding, though, to see if a hearing is scheduled in the next few weeks, and that's ultimately going to be up to the majority party in the legislature. So we'll see. And then just to add to something Carmen mentioned, one of the things that law enforcement does and victim advocates do when we respond to a circumstance involving domestic violence is assess the lethality of the situation. Advocates and law enforcement know how dangerous this crime is and that it can be linked to other types of danger. And one of the things that you look to is there access to a firearm? This is something we all know makes the situation more lethal and dangerous. Taking actions to minimize the danger to survivors is part of what advocates do and law enforcement does. I think that's why you see people here advocating for this common sense change.
Question for the mayor. Is there a reason there's not a member of the police department here to advocate for this?
No, there's no reason the police department is not here. I'm certain the police would be supportive of this endeavor. As you see, we had a packed room, and we got the top law enforcement officer in the state of Wisconsin who's here as well. There are a number of people, again, advocates in our community who really wanted to bring voice to this, right? The police department certainly are the ones that go and investigate these crimes when they happen, and they do that day in and day out when these instances occur in the city of Milwaukee. So they're here, they're partners, they always have been, always will be. There's a strong relationship and partnership with the police department and Sojourner Family Peace Center. So there's no particular reason as to why not. But there are a lot of folks who wanted to raise their voice and be visible to this. And police are always going to be there.
Mayor, two questions. One, what are the next steps? What does that look like? They mentioned a hearing, but then what is the timeline for a possible vote?
Well, perhaps I'll let Representative Subek to touch on that, or Attorney General Call, because there's a legislative process that has to happen in Madison. So, Representative, would you like to?
Sure. So a lot remains to be seen in the legislative process. Alluding to the question that was asked earlier, we are still finishing circulating it for co-sponsorship. At this point, we have one Republican who has signed on as a co-sponsor, and I certainly invite more to sign on. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. But next steps then are the bill will get a bill number. It will get referred to a committee, and a committee chair would need to hold a hearing, not knowing yet what committee it will go to. I can't speak to who will be making that decision, but I'll certainly be reaching out, I'm sure, on the Senate. Senator Royce will reach out to those committee chairs to ask for a hearing, to encourage a hearing on the bill. We would invite folks to share their experiences with their own legislators so that they hopefully will, too, sign on to the bill. From there, I go through the normal legislative process, of course. But I would say at this moment, what is needed is we need to be telling the stories of survivors and stories of those who haven't survived. So that every legislator in the state legislature, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, is hearing those stories and carrying those stories with them as they make decisions on this bill.
Thank you. And then my second question for the mayor, a little off topic. We just found out that some some of our crews are at the scene of a possible pursuit that ended in a school bus crash. If you're able to speak on the number of pursuits in the city so far.
I don't have the precise number of pursuits that have happened in the city so far, but what I will say is this. I got the information about the pursuit from earlier today. The reason why individuals are pursued is because they're driving recklessly in the first place, and that's where it's important to have this enforcement power of police, right? Those folks have to be stopped, and they have to know that there's a consequence for driving recklessly, because if they don't, they will continue to drive recklessly, continuing to endanger the lives of citizens all across Milwaukee. So I understand that the suspect is in custody. I'm happy that the suspect is in custody, and because this suspect endangered the welfare of people in Milwaukee, you know, I've been very consistent about this since I've been mayor, that if any person commits acts that endanger people, that they do things that are destructive or criminal activity, then they should be held to the fullest extent of the law. I mean that, and I expect the same thing to happen with this individual as well. I also want to point out as well that Daryl Marine from Florida Latino has been a great partner on issues around gun violence is here as well. I want to thank Daryl and Florida Latino for being here today as well. Is there any final question?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.